Issue 1. A Life of Light. Wide shot of the golden fields of Valeshire under the midday sun. The sky is a rich blue, dotted with fluffy clouds, and a flock of birds flies in formation overhead. The manor is visible in the distance, nestled atop the cliffs. Valeshire, a village untouched by the shadows of war. Daisies, cornflowers, and buttercups swaying in a gentle breeze. A bee hovers over one of the blooms. Here the air was sweet and the land knew only peace. Seraphina's laughter fills the air as she watches her children play. She stands barefoot in the grass, wearing a simple dress, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. "Ceres, Alric, stay where I can see you." "We're fine, Mama." Alric brandishes a small wooden sword, his face set in a fierce expression of mock bravery. He points the sword at Ceres, who pretends to be frightened. "Fear not, Ceres, I'll save you from the dragon." "Don't let it eat me." Seraphina crouches low, mimicking a dragon. Her eyes sparkle with joy as she growls playfully, curling her hands like claws. "You think you can stop me, little knight? I'll roast you both for dinner." Alric charges toward her, swinging his wooden sword. Seraphina dodges dramatically, making a show of stumbling. "Take that, you monster." "Oh no! A valiant knight." Wide shot of Eldin leaning against a wooden fence, clad in the polished armour of Solara's knights. His sword hangs at his hip, and his expression is soft as he watches his family. Eldin of Solara, a knight and hero, cherished the peace he had fought so hard to protect. Close-up of Eldrin's hand resting on the hilt of his sword. His armour gleams, but it's dented and worn, evidence of his battles. Eldin smiles faintly, his eyes following Seraphina as she picks up Alric and spins him around. "Oh, Eldin, I could watch this forever." Establishing shot of their stone manor perched on the cliffside, surrounded by a lush garden. The waves of the sapphire sea crash against the rocks below. The manor was modest, but full of life, a sanctuary against the world's darkness. Inside the home, the family gathers at a wooden table for supper. Eldin serves soup while Ceres and Alric chatter excitedly. And then Alric said he'd fight a real dragon one day. "I will, just like Papa." Seraphina and Eldin exchange a look, their love for each other evident. With you as their mother, they'll grow up strong and kind. And brave, with you as their father. Seraphina stands alone on the manor's balcony, gazing at the sea. The sun sets, casting the sky in fiery hues of orange and pink. But peace, like the sunset, is fleeting. A faint shadow creeps across the fields below, the distant storm clouds growing darker. Close-up of Seraphina's face, her brow furrowing as a chill runs down her spine. Why does it feel like something is coming? The village square is bustling with activity, as a royal messenger rides in on a black steed. Villagers gather around, their faces marked with concern. The peace of Valeshire shattered with the sound of hooves. The messenger dismounts, unfurling a scroll sealed with the king's insignia. "Hear ye, citizens of Solara. By decree of King Hadrian, all knights are summoned to defend our borders against Morrowind." Eldin steps forward, his expression grim. His armoured hand rests on the hilt of his sword as he listens intently. Eldin knew this day would come. Inside their home, Eldin packs his belongings in silence. His armour lies neatly on the bed, polished and ready. Duty weighed heavily on him, but it was a burden he accepted. Seraphina enters the room, her face pale. She places a hand on his shoulder, her fingers trembling. "Eldin, do you have to go?" Close-up of Eldrin's face as he turns to her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "If I don't fight, who will?" Seraphina clutches Eldrin's hands, her voice breaking as tears well in her eyes. "We could leave, Eldin, take the children and go somewhere far away." Eldin pulls her into an embrace, resting his chin on her head. "You know I can't do that, love. This kingdom needs me." Seraphina's tears streak her cheeks as she whispers against his chest. "Promise me you'll come back." Eldin kisses her forehead, his expression soft but resolute. "I swear it. I'll return to you and the children, no matter what." A montage of Eldin donning his armour, buckling his chestplate, strapping on his sword and pulling on his gauntlets. A knight's vow is unbreakable, but fate often has other plans. The children burst into the room laughing as they run to their father. "Are you going to fight dragons, Papa?" Smiling. "Something like that." At dawn, Eldrin mounts his horse. Other knights gather in the village square, their armour gleaming in the morning light. The Knights of Solara answered the call as they always had. Seraphina holds Ceres and Alric close, their faces full of admiration and fear as they wave goodbye. Eldrin rides off with the other knights, disappearing into the horizon. Seraphina watches until he is no longer in sight, and so began the waiting. The waiting begins. Seraphina caring for her children, teaching Ceres how to braid flowers, helping Alric with his wooden swordplay. Days turn to weeks, weeks to months. Seraphina sits by the window sewing a torn tunic. Her gaze drifts toward the horizon. No word came. No letters. Only silence. Close up of Seraphina's face, her expression a mix of fear and determination, thinking, "He promised me. He'll come back." The manor is lit by the warm glow of lanterns, contrasting with the darkening storm clouds in the sky. The village of Valeshire sleeps peacefully in the distance. The night began like any other, a calm before the storm. Inside, Seraphina tucks Ceres into bed. Ceres clutches her stuffed bear, her auburn hair spread across the pillow. "Good night, my sweet girl. Sweet dreams." Seraphina moves to Alric's bed. He sits up, holding his wooden sword. "Mama, do you think Papa is fighting dragons?" Smiling faintly. "He's fighting to keep us safe." Close-up of Seraphina as she kisses Alric's forehead. Her expression is tender but weary. "Now sleep, brave knight. Tomorrow's adventures will need all your strength." Unease in the air. Seraphina stands in the doorway of the children's room watching them sleep. Shadows from the storm clouds dance across the walls. But something in the air felt wrong. She steps into the hallway, the lanterns flickering unnaturally as if an unseen wind is disturbing them. The fire, it's fading. Seraphina enters the kitchen, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her sword. The fireplace, once bright and warm, sputters weakly. Thinking, this isn't right. A loud, deliberate knock echoes through the house. The sound reverberates unnaturally as if the walls themselves are trembling. Close-up of Seraphina, her expression tense. She slowly draws her sword, its polished steel catching the dim light. This is no neighbour, no traveller. She approaches the door cautiously, her grip on the sword tightening. Her breathing is slow and controlled. Seraphina's grip on her sword tightens. She stands her ground, her expression defiant. "Who's asking?" Seraphina opens the door to reveal a cloaked figure. Shadows writhe around him, his skeletal staff glowing faintly green. Necromancer. Is this the home of Eldrin the Knight? The necromancer tilts his head, his skeletal features partially visible beneath his hood. Necromancer. A pity. I was hoping he'd be here to greet me. Step aside, little widow, and no harm will come to you. Close-up of Seraphina's face as the word widow lands like a blow. Her eyes narrow and her voice drops. You'll find no one here but me, and I'm not so easy to kill. The necromancer raises his staff. Shadows swirl around him, forming grotesque shapes. Necromancer. Then you'll do in his stead. Seraphina lunges forward, her blade slicing through the first shadowy creature. Black ichor sprays as the ghoul collapses. Seraphina. You'll regret stepping into my home. The kitchen is in chaos as more ghouls surge forward, their twisted forms clawing at her. Furniture splinters under their weight. A wide shot of the room as Seraphina fights with ferocity. Her blade flashes, cutting down the undead, but more take their place. But for everyone she felled, 2 more rose in its place. Seraphina freezes mid-swing as a piercing scream echoes from upstairs. The kid yells, "Mama, help!" She turns toward the staircase, her heart pounding. More undead block her path. "Ceres, Alric!" With renewed fury, she slashes through the creatures, forcing her way to the stairs. "I'm coming, hold on!" Seraphina bursts into the children's room, her sword dripping with ichor. She stops in her tracks, horror filling her face. The necromancer stands at the foot of their beds, his staff glowing as runes pulse on the floor. The children lie motionless, pale as snow, and you can see blood on the blankets and pillows. Necromancer. Such pure souls. They will serve me well. Seraphina charges at him with a primal scream, her sword aimed for his heart. You'll pay for this. The necromancer raises his staff, blocking her strike with a blast of dark magic. The room shakes with the force of their clash. The necromancer vanishes in a swirl of shadows, leaving Seraphina alone in the room. The runes fade and the light dims. Seraphina drops her sword, collapsing to her knees beside the children. Tears stream down her face as she touches their cold cheeks. No, no, please. As tears continue to pour down her cheeks. Why? Why? What did I do to deserve this? A close-up of her face contorted with grief as she cradles them in her arms. In that moment, her world was shattered. Everything that she cared for, everything that she had left, gone.
Our stories written in the skies, our battles leave their scars. But every loss and every tear forges who we are. The winds of destiny call us from afar. Winds of destiny carry us higher through the darkened storm and eternal fire. With every breath we'll seize the night, on wings of fate we'll claim the light. Winds of destiny, our guiding flame. Through the shadows we rise again. With hearts unbroken we will fight. On winds of fate we claim the light. As the winds fade to a quiet hum, the stars align, the battle won. With whispers soft they call our name. Through destiny's wind we rise again.
Chapter 4. The Whisper of the Void. Days passed in a blur of grief. Seraphina wandered the ruins of her home, clutching the charred remains of Ceres's favorite doll. The laughter of her children haunted her, their absence an unbearable weight that threatened to crush her spirit. Each night she sat alone by the hearth, her hands trembling as she stared into the dying embers, the silence a deafening reminder of all she had lost. One fateful evening, as the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, the air seemed to change. A chill settled over the manor, a cold so deep it seemed to seep into her very bones. The shadows in the room grew darker, deeper, as though they had come alive. As she sat in the garden, the pale light of the moon casting a silver glow over the ruins, she heard it for the first time. A voice. It was soft, almost imperceptible, carried on the wind like a distant echo. "Do you seek vengeance?" Seraphina froze, her breath catching in her throat. She turned her head, searching for the source of the voice, but the garden was empty. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the cold night breeze. "Do you wish to destroy the one who took everything from you?" The voice continued, louder now, its tone smooth and hypnotic. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling as she reached for the hilt of her sword. But even as she spoke, she knew this was no mortal intruder. The air grew colder still, and the shadows coalesced into a figure. It materialized before her, a being cloaked in black, its face obscured by a hood. The very air around it seemed to hum with dark energy. Its presence was oppressive, its power undeniable. "I am Calthor," it said, its voice reverberating through her very soul, an ancient entity bound to the void. Seraphina rose to her feet, her sword drawn, though her hands trembled. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I want nothing," Calthor replied. "It is you who desires, you who burns with rage and sorrow, you who would give anything to see your enemies fall." Seraphina's grip on her sword tightened. "If you know what I've lost, Then you know I won't make deals with monsters. Calthor chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her feet. "Oh, Seraphina," it said, "you already dwell in darkness. You have nothing left to lose and everything to gain." The entity gestured, and the shadows around it shifted, forming images in the air. Seraphina saw the necromancer, his skeletal face, his glowing green eyes, his staff pulsating with malevolent energy. She saw the ruins of her home, the bodies of her children, the life she had lost. "He will not stop," Calthor said. "His hunger is endless. He will destroy all you once held dear until nothing remains but ash and bone." Seraphina's heart ached as she stared at the images, her mind racing. The necromancer had taken everything from her: her family, her peace, her future. She had nothing left, nothing but the burning need for justice. Or was it vengeance? "What are you offering?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Calthor's form loomed closer, its presence enveloping her. "I can give you the power you need," it said. "Strength beyond imagination, magic that can rend the heavens, the ability to destroy those who wronged you." Seraphina's sword wavered, the weight of her grief and anger pressing down on her. "What's the cost?" "Power always comes at a cost," Calthor said, its tone almost gentle. "You will become a dark knight, bound to the void. Your power will be immense, but it will come with hunger, a hunger for souls. You must learn to control it, or it will consume you." The garden was silent, save for the sound of Seraphina's ragged breathing. She looked at the figure before her, then down at her trembling hands. What choice did she have? Without power, she was nothing. Without power, she could not avenge her children. "I accept," she said, her voice firm. Calthor extended a hand, its clawed fingers shrouded in shadow. "Then take my hand and seal the pact." Seraphina hesitated for only a moment before she reached out. As her fingers brushed against Calthor's, a surge of dark energy coursed through her body, searing her veins and filling her with a power unlike anything she had ever known. She cried out, falling to her knees as the transformation began. Her armor darkened, the once polished steel now black as night, and etched with crimson runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Her sword shifted, its blade longer and sharper, its edge pulsating with the same dark energy that now coursed through her veins. Her eyes burned with an otherworldly light, and her heart, once filled with love and warmth, was now a cold, unyielding force of vengeance. When the transformation was complete, Calthor stepped back, its form blending once more into the shadows. "You are bound to the void now, Seraphina," it said. "Use its power wisely, and you may yet find the justice you seek. But beware, the void is a hungry master." As the entity faded into the darkness, Seraphina rose to her feet, her new strength radiating from her like a palpable force. She looked down at her hands, now clad in gauntlets of blackened steel, and clenched her fists. The hunger Calthor spoke of was already there, a whisper in the back of her mind, but she pushed it aside. She had a mission, a purpose. The necromancer would pay for what he had done, and she would not rest until she saw it through. With the moonlight glinting off her dark armor, Seraphina turned and strode into the night, the shadows seeming to follow in her wake. The hunt had begun. Chapter 5. The Hunt for the Necromancer. For weeks, Seraphina roamed the shadowy corners of Mithraea, the dark powers granted by Calthor seeping into every fiber of her being. Her transformation into a dark knight was both a blessing and a curse. It gifted her with immense strength and the ability to wield the void's power, but it came at a great cost. The once bright spark of warmth and compassion that had defined her was now buried beneath layers of cold determination and unrelenting grief. The whispers of the void filled her mind constantly, urging her toward violence, testing her will to maintain control. Every use of her newfound abilities left her feeling both exhilarated and hollow, as if the void was not only consuming her enemies, but slowly eroding what remained of her humanity. Her strength was unparalleled. She could fell the mightiest foes with a single strike of her blackened blade. But the hunger for souls gnawed at her constantly, a whisper in the back of her mind that grew louder with each battle she fought. Guided by rumors and whispers of necromantic activity, she traveled through desolate wastelands, forgotten ruins, and crumbling villages. Her once soft features were now hardened, her stoic expression betraying none of the torment she felt inside. Every encounter brought her closer to her goal, In the shadowed alleyways of Greystone, a group of mercenaries ambushed her, their steel blades glinting in the faint light of the city's dying lanterns. They had watched her from the shadows, smug confidence etched on their faces. One of them leered, his voice dripping with malice. "Think you're tough, sweetheart? We'll show you what happens to someone who wanders where they don't belong." They moved with the precision of trained killers, circling her like wolves, but their overconfidence was palpable. One lunged at her, his sword aimed for her heart, but Seraphina sidestepped effortlessly, her blackened blade humming as it sliced through the air. She disarmed him with a flick of her wrist, her strength sending his weapon clattering to the ground. Before he could react, she drove her sword into his chest, the dark energy coursing through her weapon exploding outward, engulfing him in shadowy flames. The others hesitated, but only for a moment. They came at her in a flurry of steel, their attacks coordinated and relentless. Seraphina's movements were a blur, a deadly dance of shadow and steel. She summoned tendrils of darkness from the void, the inky black whips ensnaring one mercenary and hurling him into the stone wall with bone-crushing force. Another's blade found its mark, slashing across her arm, but the wound healed almost instantly, the void's power surging to mend her flesh. Her sword pulsed with malevolent energy as she drove it into another attacker. As the blade pierced his chest, a wave of icy cold spread outward, freezing the very air around them. The mercenary's body convulsed violently, his scream choking into silence as his soul began to uncoil from his form. A shimmering tendril of light pulled inexorably into the dark core of the blade. The sword's surface rippled as though alive, devouring the essence with a hunger that made the shadows around Seraphina grow darker, heavier. A faint, mournful wail escaped the sword as it fed, a sound that seemed to echo deep within her own mind. The moment the blade pierced his chest, the air shimmered with an unholy light. The mercenary's scream echoed through the alley as his very soul was drawn from his body, a glowing essence that spiraled into the sword like water down a drain. The blade drank deeply, its dark surface pulsing with satisfaction as the mercenary's lifeless form crumpled to the ground. The remaining mercenaries faltered, terror etched across their faces. Their bravado melted away as they witnessed the inhuman power radiating from her, the dark tendrils of the void twisting and writhing like living entities. One mercenary dropped his sword, his hands trembling uncontrollably, while another took a staggering step back, his eyes wide with horror. The faint, ghostly wails of consumed souls emanating from her blade only deepened their panic, the sound seeming to claw at their sanity. In that moment, they realized they were not facing a mere knight, they were standing before a force of vengeance made flesh. Seraphina advanced on them, her glowing eyes promising their doom. With each strike of her sword, more souls were consumed, their energies fueling the void within her. A wave of dark energy burst outward from her, and the force threw the last of them to the ground. Their lifeless bodies lay scattered, the faint glow of their stolen souls fading into the night. Her journey continued into the heart of Mithraea's forsaken lands, where whispers of dark wizards practicing forbidden magic reached her ears. In the ruins of an ancient temple, she confronted a cabal of these sorcerers. Their leader, a gaunt figure draped in crimson robes, sneered as he raised his hands, chanting in a language older than time. A fiery serpent erupted from his palms, its blazing form coiling as it lunged at Seraphina. She stood her ground, her gauntleted hand extending as she summoned a barrier of shadow. The serpent struck the barrier, its flames hissing and sputtering as they met the void's cold embrace. Seraphina advanced, her blade slicing through the air as the wizards conjured more elemental beasts to stop her. A golem of crackling lightning lumbered toward her, its massive fists slamming into the ground and sending arcs of electricity racing toward her. Seraphina leapt into the air, her strength carrying her higher than any mortal could achieve. As she descended, she plunged her sword into the golem's chest, the void's energy ripping through the construct and reducing it to a pile of smoking rubble. The remaining wizards attempted to flee, but Seraphina was relentless. She summoned a storm of shadowy blades that rained down upon them, each strike accompanied by the sickening sound of steel slicing flesh and the anguished cries of the doomed. The shimmering essence of their souls, glowing faintly like stolen fireflies, spiraled upward toward her blade. As the void claimed each soul, the sword pulsed with an ominous hunger, its dark surface writhing as if alive. Seraphina's arms trembled slightly from the surge of energy coursing through her, the power both intoxicating and draining. The air around her grew heavier, charged with the remnants of their fading lives, as she pressed on with unrelenting determination. The glowing wisps of life spiraled into her blade, which pulsed with dark energy as it drank deeply. Their screams echoed through the ruins, the sound rising in a terrible crescendo as their souls were consumed, leaving their lifeless bodies to crumple to the ground like discarded husks. When the battle was over, the leader lay at her feet, his crimson robes soaked in his own blood. His soul lingered, faintly glowing as if resisting the pull of her blade. Seraphina knelt beside him, her glowing eyes boring into his. "Tell me where he is," she demanded, her voice cold and unyielding, "or I'll let the void take you." The wizard's lips trembled as he whispered the name of the necromancer, the Black Reaper. As his final breath escaped, his soul succumbed to the blade, its light extinguished as it was drawn into the void within her weapon. Her quest eventually led her to the ruined city of Virenth, where she faced a coven of necromancers deep within the catacombs. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the glow of green runes illuminated the crumbling walls. As she carved through the undead that guarded the coven, her blade glinted with dark magic, its edge slicing through bone and flesh with ease. Each swing of her sword was a symphony of destruction, the void's power amplifying her every strike. The leader of the coven, an ancient sorcerer draped in tattered robes, sneered at her. "You seek the one who calls himself the Black Reaper," he rasped, "but you will find only despair." Seraphina stepped over the corpses of his disciples, her eyes glowing with the power of the void. "Tell me where he is, or I'll send you to the abyss." The sorcerer raised his staff, chanting in a guttural, otherworldly language. Shadows coalesced around him, forming grotesque figures that solidified into twisted monstrosities. They lunged at Seraphina, their claws raking through the air. She parried their attacks with precision, her blade cutting through their corrupted flesh as tendrils of void energy erupted from her armor, ensnaring and disintegrating them. The sorcerer's staff glowed brighter, and the runes along the walls flared with malevolent energy. The ground trembled as a massive construct of bone and shadow rose from the depths of the catacombs, its hollow eyes burning with green fire. Seraphina tightened her grip on her sword, steadying her breathing as she assessed the towering foe, her muscles coiled like springs, every fiber of her being prepared for the impending clash. She whispered a silent prayer, not to any god, but to the memory of her children, fueling her resolve. Shadows flickered around her armor, and the void's whispers grew louder in her mind, urging her forward with promises of victory and vengeance. The construct roared, the sound shaking the very foundation of the catacombs as it charged at her. Seraphina stood her ground, channeling the void's power into her blade. With a cry of defiance, she lunged at the construct, her sword meeting its massive claws in a clash that sent shockwaves through the chamber. The battle was brutal. Each strike of her blade met with bone-shattering force. She summoned tendrils of darkness to bind the construct, but it tore through them with its immense strength. Realizing brute force would not be enough, Seraphina focused her energy, her eyes glowing brighter as she channeled the void's power into a single, devastating attack. She leapt onto the construct's back, driving her sword into its spine. The blade pulsed with dark energy, and the construct let out a deafening roar as it collapsed, its body disintegrating into ash. The sorcerer's laughter echoed through the chamber as he raised his staff once more. "You cannot defeat him," he sneered. "He is death incarnate, a being of unimaginable power, and soon he will consume the living world." Seraphina's blade flashed, and the sorcerer's head fell to the floor. As his body crumpled, a scrap of parchment slipped from his robes, marked with a symbol she had seen before, a black sun eclipsing the sky. The symbol was tied to an ancient stronghold, a fortress deep in the blighted lands of Morrowind. There, she knew, the necromancer waited. Chapter 6: The Fortress of Shadows. After a long journey to Morrowind, Seraphina had planned to stop in the nearby city to rest and replenish her strength. But as she approached, the distant sound of chaos reached her ears. Panicked screams, the clash of steel, and the guttural roars of a monstrous creature. Annoyance flickered across her face as she drew closer and saw the city's residents fleeing in terror, their faces pale with fear. Out of curiosity and frustration, Seraphina decided to investigate. Her steps quickened as the massive silhouette of a grotesque one-eyed monster came into view. The creature towered over the city, its gaping maw revealing rows of jagged teeth, and its single enormous eye burning with a malevolent light. The city's soldiers were hopelessly outmatched, their weapons barely scratching its thick rocky hide as it swatted them aside like insects. Seraphina narrowed her glowing eyes, her patience wearing thin. The void's whispers urged her to act, feeding her growing irritation. With a deep breath, she charged forward, her sword already humming with dark energy. Shadows writhed around her as she summoned the void's power, her blade glowing with a crimson aura. The soldiers stopped in their tracks, their gazes following her as she sprinted toward the monster. With a leap that defied human capability, Seraphina soared into the air, her blade raised high. The monster's eyes swiveled toward her, but it was too slow. She brought her sword down with all her might, the blade piercing straight into its massive eye. The creature let out an earth-shaking roar, its body convulsing as dark tendrils erupted from the blade, burrowing deep into its flesh. Seraphina gritted her teeth, channeling the void's power as the monster's soul began to unravel. A faint, ghostly light emerged from its eye, spiraling toward her blade. The sword pulsed and shimmered, feeding on the creature's essence. The monster's movements grew sluggish, its roars fading to a low, guttural groan as its soul was consumed entirely. With a final shudder, the creature collapsed, its massive form crashing into the ground with a thunderous impact. The earth trembled beneath Seraphina's feet as she landed gracefully atop its lifeless body. She pulled her blade free, the dark energy dissipating as she turned to face the stunned soldiers and fleeing residents. They looked at her with a mix of awe and fear, their whispers making it clear that they now knew what she was. Frustration flared within her. Any hope of resting here had vanished. Resigned to the reality of her isolation, she sheathed her sword and continued her journey toward Morrowind. The sky was perpetually dark, with storm clouds swirling ominously above. Every step Seraphina took felt heavier, as if the ground itself sought to hold her back, to drag her into the abyss. As she approached the necromancer's stronghold, the air grew colder, biting through her dark armor and chilling her to the bone. The fortress loomed ahead, a blackened monolith of jagged stone and twisted metal. Its spires pierced the stormy heavens, and the faint glow of sickly green runes illuminated its walls. The air was thick with the stench of rot, and the faint sound of wailing echoed through the desolate landscape. Seraphina tightened her grip on her blade, the void's whispers growing louder in her mind. They urged her forward, promising her the power to destroy the necromancer, to avenge her children. But beneath their seductive tones lay a darker truth. The void cared not for her vengeance. It sought only to consume. Inside the fortress, the corridors were narrow and winding, lined with the bones of the dead. Their empty eye sockets seemed to follow her as she passed, and the faint sound of whispers echoed through the halls. The shadows here were alive, writhing and shifting as though they sought to ensnare her. The void within her resonated with the darkness, a pulse of recognition that sent a shiver down her spine. Her first encounter came swiftly. A group of undead sentinels emerged from the shadows, their decayed bodies clad in rusted armor. They moved with eerie precision, their hollow eyes glowing with a malevolent green light. Seraphina wasted no time, her blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Each strike of her sword sent a pulse of dark energy through their bodies, reducing them to ash. But for every foe she felled, more seemed to rise from the shadows, their numbers endless. She summoned the void, tendrils of black energy erupting from her armor and ensnaring the undead. The tendrils tightened, crushing the life from them, and their souls spiraled into her blade, fueling its dark hunger. The power was intoxicating, and for a brief moment, she felt invincible. But the toll it took on her body and mind was undeniable. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, and her vision blurred as the void's whispers grew louder, more insistent. Deeper into the fortress, the resistance grew fiercer. The necromancer's acolytes appeared, their chants echoing through the halls as they summoned waves of undead to halt her advance. The air crackled with dark magic, and the walls seemed to close in around her. Seraphina fought with a ferocity born of desperation, her blade cutting through flesh and bone as she pushed forward. The void's power surged through her, each swing of her sword releasing a burst of dark energy that obliterated her foes. At last, she reached the heart of the fortress, a vast chamber bathed in an eerie green light. The walls were lined with towering statues of long-forgotten gods, their faces twisted in anguish. At the center of the chamber stood the necromancer, shrouded in a cloak of darkness. His skeletal staff pulsed with malevolent energy, and the ground beneath him was etched with runes that glowed with an unnatural light. "Ah, the Crimson Knight," he said, his voice smooth and mocking. "You've come a long way to die." Seraphina raised her blade, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "I didn't come here to die. I came to end you." The necromancer laughed, a sound that chilled her to the core. "Do you not recognize me, Seraphina? Have the years truly hardened your heart so much?" His gaze swept over her, his expression twisting into a cruel smile. "You were just a weak housewife with a blade, and now look at you, a monster, just like me." He threw his head back and laughed, the sound reverberating through the chamber like a taunt. She froze, her grip on her sword faltering. "What?" The necromancer reached up, pulling back his hood to reveal a face she knew all too well. It was Eldin. The world seemed to tilt, her mind reeling as she struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. "No, it can't be," she whispered, her voice trembling. Eldrin's eyes glowed with an unnatural green light, his face a twisted mockery of the man she had once loved. "It is me?" he said, his tone both sorrowful and filled with malice. "The void spared me, Seraphina. It gave me power beyond imagining, and now it has brought you to me." Tears welled in her eyes as she raised her blade once more. "You're lying. The Eldrin I knew would never succumb to this darkness." He laughed again, the sound devoid of warmth. "The Eldrin you knew is gone. The void has shown me the truth. Love is weakness, and power is all that matters." Chapter 7. The Truth Revealed. The air in the ruined temple felt heavier than before, as if the very walls bore witness to the weight of Seraphina's past and the grim reality she was about to uncover. The flickering green light from the necromancer's staff bathed the room in an otherworldly glow, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed alive with malice. Seraphina stood at the edge of her strength, battered and bruised, her muscles screaming in protest with every breath she took. Her body bore the marks of countless battles, the bruises and cuts a testament to her unyielding determination. Yet, beneath the physical pain, an even deeper exhaustion gnawed at her spirit, a relentless grief and anger that threatened to overwhelm her. Still, her resolve burned like an unyielding flame, fed by the memories of her children's laughter and the life that had been stolen from her. Across from her, the necromancer stood, his skeletal form cloaked in tattered black robes. His glowing, emerald-green eyes burned into her soul, and his hollow, unnatural voice carried the weight of centuries of despair. "You've hunted me far and wide, Seraphina," the necromancer began, his tone smooth and almost mocking. "And now, here you are. For what, I wonder? To destroy me? Or to seek the truth?" Seraphina's sword trembled in her hand. "The truth," she spat, her voice taut with emotion, "is that you killed my children. You destroyed my life. And now, I will destroy you." The necromancer tilted his head as though considering her words. His skeletal face, though expressionless, carried a strange air of regret, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. A clawed hand hovered over his staff, tapping it lightly as if lost in thought, before he let out a long, hollow sigh. The faintest tremor in his stance hinted at an inner turmoil, as though a fragment of the man he had once been stirred beneath the surface of the monster he had become. "Ah, but do you truly know what happened to your life? Or why I came to your home that night?" Seraphina's brow furrowed as the necromancer raised his staff, the runes along its length glowing brighter. With a wave of his hand, the air filled with spectral images, phantoms of memories floating like shimmering fragments in the darkness. "I will show you the truth." "Seraphina," he said, "you deserve to know the reason behind your pain." The first memory unfolded before her. She saw Eldrin, standing proud and noble as he prepared to leave for battle. His armor gleamed in the sunlight, and his sword rested at his side. He kissed her passionately, whispering words of love and promises to return. "Eldrin," Seraphina whispered, her heart aching as she reached toward the vision. The memory shifted, showing Eldrin on the battlefield. He fought valiantly, cutting down enemies with skill and precision. But the tide of battle was merciless, and soon he was surrounded, bloodied, and on the verge of collapse. As his strength waned, a shadowy figure emerged from the carnage, a being shrouded in darkness, its form shifting and amorphous. "What is this?" Seraphina demanded, her voice trembling as she watched the scene unfold. The necromancer's voice was low and somber. "This is the moment everything changed." The shadow approached Eldrin, its voice a soft hiss. "You fight for your life," it whispered, "but it is slipping through your grasp. Tell me, warrior, what do you desire most?" The battlefield seemed to still for a moment, the sounds of clashing steel and dying cries fading to a muted hum in Eldrin's ears. He could feel the chill of the shadow's presence, like frost creeping over his skin. His breaths came shallow and rapid, his mind racing as memories of Seraphina and their children filled his vision. He saw Ceres chasing butterflies in the golden fields of Valeshire, Ulrich pretending to be a brave knight like his father. He heard their laughter, the warmth of their love cutting through the pain of his failing body. "I need to survive," Eldrin thought, the words echoing in his mind. The weight of his desperation pressed down on him, a crushing realization that he could not protect them if he fell here. His grip on his sword faltered, blood dripping from his trembling fingers as he stared into the void's swirling depths. The shadow's presence grew heavier, suffocating. "Will you let them be taken from you?" it hissed again, its voice crawling into his thoughts. "Or will you rise for them?" Eldrin swallowed hard, his throat dry. The warmth of his family's love clashed with the cold, so unyielding promise of the shadow. Finally, his voice cracked as he rasped, "My family. I'll do anything, anything to protect them." Eldrin clutched his sword, his breaths ragged as blood poured from his wounds. "My family," he rasped, his voice filled with desperation. "I need to survive, for my wife, for my children." The shadow circled him, its presence suffocating. "And if I grant you this survival, if I give you the power to return to them, will you pay the price?" Eldrin's hands shook as he dropped his sword. His love for Seraphina and their children burned in his chest, stronger than the pain of his wounds or the fear of death. "Anything," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll do anything." The shadow coiled around him, its dark tendrils seeping into his skin. Eldrin screamed as his body convulsed, his once warm eyes turning an unnatural green. The transformation was agonizing, reshaping him into something inhuman, a creature bound by the shadow's curse. The memory faded, leaving Seraphina trembling as tears streamed down her face. A storm of emotions raged within her. Grief for the man she had loved, guilt for not recognizing the sacrifice he had made, and a dawning understanding of the torment Hippolyte had endured. "He did it! For us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, the weight of the truth pressing down on her like a crushing tide. Her mind reeled, torn between the desire to mourn the man he had been and the rage at the monster he had become. The necromancer lowered his staff, the light dimming as he turned to face her. "He did it because he loved you," he said. His love for you and your children was stronger than his fear of death. But love alone could not protect him from the curse of the shadow. It twisted his soul, consumed him, and turned him into me. Seraphina's sword dropped an inch, her hands shaking. "Then why?" she asked, her voice filled with anguish. "Why did you come to our home that night? Why did you kill them?" The necromancer's eyes flickered, the green glow dimming for a moment. "I didn't come to kill them," he said. "I came searching for myself. I wanted to remember who I had been. I wanted to find the man who had loved you so deeply. But the curse was too strong. It demanded blood. It demanded their souls." She stared at him, her mind reeling as the pieces fell into place. The necromancer had come to their home not to destroy Eldrin, but because he had forgotten that he was Eldrin. The shadow's curse had fractured his mind, erasing the man he had once been and leaving behind only the monster. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You killed them. Because of the curse?" The necromancer nodded slowly. "I tried to stop it," he said. "I tried to fight it, but I was too weak." Seraphina's grip on her sword tightened, her knuckles white as she raised the blade once more. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "Everything." "And I will carry that guilt for eternity," the necromancer replied, his tone heavy with sorrow. "But if you wish to end this to ensure no one else suffers as you have, then destroy the staff. It is the source of my power. Destroy it, and destroy me. But beware!" His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "The shadow's wrath will not fade quietly. Its hunger will not simply disappear. Even in my destruction, the void may demand a price far greater than either of us can foresee." Her hands shook as she stepped forward, her sword glinting in the dim light. She thought of Eldin, of the man he had been, the love they had shared, and the life they had built together. She thought of their children, of their laughter and joy, and of the terrible night when it had all been ripped away. "Eldin," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "if there's any part of you left, I'm sorry." The necromancer lowered his staff, his glowing eyes meeting hers. "You were my light, Seraphina," he said, his voice soft, "and I was your shadow. End this and let me rest." Chapter 8. The Final Battle. The chamber trembled as Seraphina stepped forward, her blade glowing with the dark energy of the void. The necromancer raised his staff high, and the air itself seemed to shudder as a wave of undead soldiers surged forth from the shadows. Their hollow eyes glowed with malevolent light, their twisted forms clad in rusted armor and armed with jagged weapons. Seraphina's lips pressed into a grim line as she adjusted her stance. She surged forward, meeting the undead horde head-on. Her blade swung in a deadly arc, slicing through the first wave of foes with brutal efficiency. Black ichor sprayed across the chamber as her sword cleaved through armor and bone, each strike enhanced by the void's power. The ground beneath her feet darkened, pulsing with residual energy that seeped into the air like smoke. The necromancer laughed from his perch atop the dais, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Your power is formidable, but it will not be enough. You face an army that does not tire, that does not falter." Seraphina ignored his taunts, her focus unshakable. She summoned tendrils of void energy, which erupted from her gauntleted hand and lashed out at the undead. The tendrils coiled around their targets, crushing them with otherworldly force before hurling their broken bodies against the stone walls. The remaining soldiers hesitated for a moment, their unnatural instincts registering caution before surging forward once more. The chamber became a whirlwind of chaos. Seraphina spun, her blade carving a path through the onslaught. When a heavily armored knight lunged at her, she sidestepped with inhuman speed, bringing her sword up in a sweeping slash that severed his torso. Another soldier swung a massive axe at her, but she countered with a blast of void energy, the force sending him careening backward into his comrades. The necromancer's voice rang out again, chanting in a guttural ancient tongue. The runes on his staff glowed brighter, and from the shadows emerged monstrosities of his own design, hulking amalgamations of flesh and bone, their misshapen limbs adorned with jagged spikes. One of the creatures let out a guttural roar, its breath reeking of decay, before charging at Seraphina. She planted her feet firmly, channeling the void's energy into her blade. The air around her shimmered as dark energy coalesced, and with a sharp cry, she unleashed a wave of force that collided with the charging beast. The impact tore through its form, scattering chunks of rotting flesh across the chamber. But as one beast fell, two more rose to take its place. Seraphina's movements became a blur as she danced through the battlefield. She vaulted over one monstrosity, driving her blade into its back and twisting as void energy erupted from the wound. The creature collapsed, convulsing as its soul was drawn into her sword. Another lunged at her, its massive claw swiping dangerously close, but she ducked low, slashing at its legs and sending it crashing to the ground. Without hesitation, she drove her blade into its head, silencing its growls. Sweat dripped from her brow, but she refused to falter. The void whispered to her, feeding her strength and guiding her strikes. She raised her free hand, and from her palm erupted a torrent of shadowy spikes that impaled several enemies in an instant. The spikes dissolved into mist, leaving only crumpled bodies in their wake. Finally, she carved her way to the base of the dais where the necromancer stood. He extended his staff, and tendrils of shadow erupted from the ground, coiling around her legs. Seraphina gritted her teeth, summoning the void to counter the attack. The shadows recoiled as a burst of crimson light emanated from her armor, and she broke free with a feral roar. The necromancer raised his staff again, chanting faster now. The ground cracked, and a massive skeletal hand clawed its way from the earth. A gargantuan figure, a bone colossus, rose from the floor, its hollow eyes glowing with an eerie green light. It let out a deafening roar, its colossal form towering over Seraphina. She charged without hesitation, leaping onto the creature's arm as it swung at her. Her boots dug into its bone, and she raced up its limb with inhuman agility. The colossus swatted at her, but she dodged each attempt, using the void's power to propel herself higher. Reaching its skull, she drove her blade into the center of its forehead. Dark energy exploded outward, and the creature let out a final, shuddering groan before collapsing into a heap of shattered bone. The necromancer staggered as the colossus fell, the green light in his staff flickering. "You cannot defeat me," he bellowed, his voice tinged with desperation. "The void is eternal!" Seraphina advanced, her blade glowing brighter with each step. "You're right," she said, her voice steady and cold. "The void is eternal, but so is my will." With a swift motion, she slashed at his staff. The runes shattered, and the necromancer screamed as the unstable energy within it began to unravel. The ground beneath them trembled violently, cracks spreading across the chamber as dark energy erupted in chaotic waves. The necromancer fell to his knees, his skeletal form flickering like a dying flame. "You don't understand," he rasped. "Destroying me will only awaken the void's true power." Seraphina raised her sword, her expression unyielding. "Then I'll face whatever comes next, but you won't be here to see it." With a final cry, she drove her blade into the heart of the necromancer. His form erupted in a blinding explosion of light and shadow, the remnants of his power spiraling into the void. When the light faded, Seraphina stood alone in the ruined chamber, her sword clutched tightly in her hand. The necromancer's ashes swirled around her, carried away by an unseen breeze. She dropped to her knees, her tears falling freely as she whispered, "Goodbye, my love." The battle was over, but the scars it left behind would never heal. Seraphina rose, her heart heavy with the weight of her loss, and stepped into the dawn of a new day, a day where the shadow no longer held sway. Chapter 9: The Haunted Castle. After the battle, Seraphina returned to Valishire, but the life she had once known was gone. She took up residence in a small, foreboding castle perched on a cliff overlooking a fishing village. Its walls, made of cold, blackened stone, were as empty as her heart, and its towering spires seemed to pierce the heavens with silent despair. The villagers whispered rumors of the Crimson Knight, a cursed warrior who prowled the night in search of souls. Despite the rumors, Seraphina lived in solitude, her only companions a handful of loyal servants who dared not question her silence. Her days were consumed by relentless training, her sword slicing through the air in intricate patterns as she honed her skills. She experimented with the void's power, summoning dark tendrils and shadowy constructs, pushing herself to understand and control its hunger. Yet every step deeper into the void left a mark, its whispers a constant, sinister chorus in her mind. At night, the castle's vast halls echoed with her footsteps, and her dreams offered little reprieve. They were haunted by her past, fragments of Ceres's laughter, Alric's wide, hopeful eyes, and Eldrin's loving embrace. These fleeting moments of joy always dissolved into darkness, the faces of her loved ones swallowed by the cold abyss that had become her reality. She would awaken in her massive, empty chamber, her breaths ragged, her resolve both strengthened and shattered. Despite her isolation, Seraphina found solace in acts of quiet kindness. Under the cover of darkness, she would descend into the village, her crimson cloak blending with the shadows. She left gold coins and supplies on doorsteps, ensuring the villagers had enough to weather the harsh seasons. When bandits roamed the outskirts or wild beasts threatened the safety of the people, Seraphina would emerge from the shadows like a specter of vengeance. Her blade, a dark streak in the moonlight, dispatched threats with ruthless precision, and with each defeated foe, she felt the void's hunger momentarily satisfied. She had learned to direct its insatiable appetite toward those who deserved judgment, using the souls of the wicked to keep her darkness at bay while protecting the innocent. But deep within, Seraphina knew her story was far from over. The void's whispers had grown louder since the necromancer's defeat, their seductive tones promising power and destruction in equal measure. She could feel its hunger clawing at her, an insatiable void waiting for her to falter. She resisted, knowing all too well the cost of surrender. The relic that had cursed Eldin, the staff that had unleashed so much pain and death, was still out there. Though shattered, its fragments remained scattered across the land. Seraphina often pondered the danger they posed if they were ever found and reassembled. She had defeated one great evil, but she understood the world's vastness and the certainty that new threats would arise. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ocean with hues of crimson and gold, Seraphina sat alone in the throne room of her castle. The high, arched windows behind her throne framed the endless sea, its waves crashing against the cliffs below. The room was vast, the stone walls adorned with faded tapestries and ancient carvings. Torches flickered in their sconces, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the cold floor. Seraphina sat in her throne, her dark armor glinting faintly in the firelight. Her sword rested across her lap, its surface pulsing faintly with the void's energy, as if it were alive. She leaned her chin against her gauntleted hand, her expression calm yet distant. Her thoughts wandered through the labyrinth of her memories, touching upon the happiness she had lost and the battles she had won. The air in the throne room was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant crash of waves and the occasional crackle of the torches. She looked down at her sword, its dark blade reflecting her face. For a brief moment, she saw not the Crimson Knight, but the woman she had once been, a mother, a wife, a protector. As the last light of day faded into the deep blue of night, the narrator's voice seemed to echo through the stillness. Seraphina, the Crimson Knight, had faced death and shadows and emerged victorious. But her journey was far from over. The void still called to her, its whispers promising both salvation and ruin. She sat alone in her castle, a figure of power and sorrow, a guardian of a world that did not yet know its need for her. Her story was not over, it was just beginning. But that is a tale for another time.